Everybody up again. Number 3, strong emotions should be expressed rather than repressed. Strong emotions should be expressed rather than repressed. If you agree, standing, disagree, sit down. All right, everybody standing again. Number 4, women experience emotions more than men do. Agree, remain, stand. You can bop up and down if you want. Women experience emotions more than men do. Okay, everybody up again. Number 5, we should not share negative emotions. Okay, everybody up for the last one. Only prayer can remove negative emotions. Only prayer can remove negative emotions. Okay, you may all take your seats. All right, so you can see 6 statements, and within those 6 statements, we have disagreements in terms of how we should relate to our emotions. So we're going to unpack this as we go through. So let's begin with defining our terms. What are emotions? I need your responses. What are emotions? When you hear emotions, what's the first thing that comes to your head, your mind? Feelings? Anything else? I'm not hearing. Worries. Okay, worries. Okay, yeah. Specific emotions? Anything related to how we feel? Yeah. Okay, let me give you a definition. It's not definitive. The part of the consciousness that involves feelings, desires, impulses, often accompanied by physiological changes. So let's take the last part of that. Give me specific examples of how our emotions affect us physically. Just shut them out. Facial expressions, how else? Heart racing, okay. What else? Our voice can pitch higher. What else? Or lower. Can impact our voice tone. Anything else? Extreme reactions like anger. Now, how do you experience anger physically? In your physical body. That's a behavior. But how do you experience it physically? Okay? And how does that manifest itself? How does that happen? So the reason... Here's the point. There is an intimate link between our physical body and our emotions. Ellen White, the way she puts it, she says, when one is affected, the other sympathizes. So there's a close connection between our emotions and our physical bodies. Now, what are we're going to come back to that later on. What are the purposes for emotions? Because God could have created us without emotions, but he gave us emotions. Now, why did he do that? What purpose do they serve? To empathize, they give us the capacity to empathize, to step into somebody else's experience. What else? What other purpose do our emotions serve? Protective, how? They do impact our choices. We're going to come back to that. Okay. Yeah, gut intuition. We'll come back to that. Absolutely. Let me run through them quickly, save time. They can enhance our understanding of God. Why would our emotions enhance our understanding of God? We are created in God's image. God is an emotional person. He has given us emotions that give us an understanding or an inkling into who he is. Understanding ourselves and others, effective communication. You spoke about empathy, aids decision making. Did you know that, when we think about decision making, we tend to think in terms of our cognitive capacity. But if your emotional abilities are adversely affected, it impacts our ability to make good choices. There was a man who experienced, he had an accident. And the accident impacted the amygdala, which is the emotional control center of the brain. After he had that accident, it impaired his ability to make good, rational choices. So we need our emotions in order to be able to make good decisions, and we'll see why as we go through. They provide motivation, emotions. They move us in a given direction. They allow us to experience pleasure. The Bible says that in his presence there are pleasures forevermore. So we are designed, our brains are hardwired to experience pleasure. The issue is, from where do we derive our pleasure? And they warn us about impending danger. You spoke about the fact that they alert us, they give us a warning that something is not quite right. So God has made us emotional beings. Right, now, the Bible says, Genesis 2 verse 15, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable for him. We are created for connection. If we do not have intimate relationships in our lives, we suffer detriment. You remember after the fall of communism, Ceausescu's children, they were called. These were babies who were placed in these children's homes. They didn't have any parents. Placed in these children's homes, perfectly healthy babies. They received physical care. They received a roof over their heads, but they developed mental health issues. Why? Because they received no affection. So we are created for healthy relationships. Now, have you ever felt lonely in a crowd? Now, that tells us that loneliness is not an issue of proximity to other people. You can be surrounded by thousands of people and still feel lonely. So if that's not about proximity, what is it about? It's about relationship. It's about heart connection. So how did the fall affect Adam and Eve's emotions? How did the fall affect Adam and Eve's emotions? What emotions did they experience as a result of the fall? Shame, sadness, guilt, absolutely. And he said, I heard your voice in the garden and I was naked because I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And there was probably a whole raft of emotions that they would have experienced as a result of their sin. So here's a question for you, and think about this before you respond. Can feelings lie? Can feelings lie? Are you sure? So let me put a couple of passages up on the screen. The Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? There is a way that seems right or feels right to a man, but its end is the way of death. So can feelings lie? Actually, feelings don't lie to us. It is the interpretation we put on our feelings that leads to deception. Because the feelings are what they are. It's the mental process that tries to derive meaning from the emotions that leads to self-deception. I read this book many, many moons ago now. It was written by an Adventist psychiatrist called Dr. Timothy Jennings. Timothy Jennings, when he was studying psychology and psychiatry, he made himself a promise that for every hour he spent studying psychiatry, he would study the Bible for 2 hours. And he made that promise to himself because he wanted to make sure that his understanding of how the mind works was grounded in the Bible and grounded in Ellen White's writings. So he writes this book and he came up with what he describes as the hierarchy of the mind. So the hierarchy of the mind is made up of the spiritual nature, and the spiritual nature has 3 components. Reason. What is reason? What is reason? It is our ability to think, to rationalize. It's a capacity that we have that animals don't have. So our ability to think. Then there is the conscience. What is the conscience, or what does the conscience do for us? It helps us to differentiate right from wrong. We can get to a point where Paul talks about the conscience being seared as with a hot iron. That's when we get to a place where we can no longer differentiate between right and wrong. That's when we commit, the unpardonable sin, when our probation closes. In order to have a healthy relationship, healthy spirituality, we need a properly functioning conscience. Worship. What is worship? Surrendering our heart to God. In fact, to expand it, worship is whatever we give our hearts to. So we can give our hearts to God, or we can give our hearts to things, or we can give our hearts to other people. So worship is what we devote our lives to. So the spiritual nature is reason, conscience, working within the context of our relationship with God. Then the next level of the mind is the will. What is the will? The ability to choose. Excellent. Ellen White says that everything depends upon the proper functioning of the will. Then there is our thoughts. Our thoughts include our beliefs, our values, our imagination. Imagination is a powerful thing. You know that. Have you ever seen a stage hypnotist at work? Here's the power of the imagination. There was a stage hypnotist. When I got a guy up on the stage and told him, gave him a piece of chalk after he hypnotized him, piece of chalk between his fingers, told him it was a cigarette, and the cigarette was burning down. And it's burning down, and now it's burning your fingers, and he drops the chalk. They bandaged up his fingers, and then the next day when they took the bandage off, he had calluses on his fingers where he held the chalk. Now, how did that happen? His mind told him that he had been burned, and so his body responded, sent those, is it the white corpuscles do the healing? Sent white corpuscles to the area to heal a wound that did not exist. The mind is powerful. Ellen White said once she was talking to a lady, and the lady said, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. And Ellen White said to her, if you keep saying you're going to get sick, you will get sick. See, our mind, our brains, the way our brain is designed, it is a prediction-making machine. So if you have a particular expectation, your brain will work to move you in the direction of that expectation. The way we think is powerful. So the thoughts, the beliefs, values, morals. The last level is the feelings, which includes impulses, desires, affections. Now, where does God want us on this diagram? Where does he want us to be making our decisions? At what level? The level of the spiritual nature. He wants us to be making our decisions based on reason, conscience, working within the context of our relationship with him. Where does the enemy of our souls want us to be making our decisions? Based on our feelings. And if you think about the worst decisions you've ever made, it's probably made on the basis of how we felt. You know, not after we did a season of prayer, not after we consulted with wise counselors or did a pros and cons exercise. We get ourselves into trouble because we allow our emotions to lead the decision-making process. So, in good decision-making, feelings should always be subordinate to reason and conscience. So it's not that our feelings are unimportant. It's that our feelings should serve a proper function. And what our feelings do, our emotions do, is supply us with information which we then submit to the higher portion of the brain so that we can make good, rational decisions. So, Ellen White says this, Testimonies for the Church. Man came from the hand of God, perfect in organization and beautiful in form. All his faculties of mind and body were fully developed and harmoniously balanced. The problem that we have today is that we function out of balance. So you can have, for example, people who are primarily left brain oriented. And left brain people tend to lean towards analytics and their reasoning. They are logical. They tend to be strategists. They don't function so much on the emotional side. Those on the right brain people, they are the ones who tend to be more passionate. They tend to be more creative. They tend to be more emotionally expressive. We are created to have the two in balance. You know, I can't remember if I have the passage up there, but when the Bible says that we are designed to worship in spirit and in truth. There's a balance between the two. If you are overly left brain, that's going to impact our relationships because we struggle with emotional connection. If we are overly on the right brain side, we can be overly emotional, and that again can adversely impact our relationship. We need to keep the two in balance. Now, when I was doing my doctorate, I did some studies in the area of interpersonal neurobiology. And that sounds more complicated than it is, but that's really about how our relationships physically alter the structure of our brains. So those babies who did not receive love and care and affection in Ceausescu's homes, their brains did not develop well because of the lack of emotional input. So interpersonal neurobiology is a phrase coined by a man called Dan Siegel, neurobiologist. And he described the mind in these terms. And see what you pick up from his description of the mind. The mind is an embodied and relational process emerging from within and between brains that regulates the flow of energy and information. And that's it's a lot of words there, but what do you pick up from that? Anything that jumps out at you. The mind is a relational process emerging from within and between brains. Anything? Interconnection. Goes back to what we were saying before, that we are created for connection. In order for my brain to thrive, it needs to be in connection with other brains. This is the passage I referred to earlier from Ellen White. The relation that exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. When one is affected, the other sympathizes. So the conclusion we draw is that without healthy relationships, we suffer emotional deprivation, often leading to mental ill health and physical illnesses. We cannot thrive without nurturing relationships. You ever heard anybody say, I don't need anybody, I've got this, me and Jesus? Well, that's not the way he created us. He created us to be in relationship with one another and with other people. So left brain and right brain integration is crucial. Here you go. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So every aspect of who we are, of our personhood, needs to be in balance and needs to be in connection with others. Bible says in Judges 17 verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's anarchy. And that's dangerous. We live in a society that says, if it feels good, do it. So we see it so much in our society. There is a concept known as expressive individualism. And the idea behind expressive individualism is that in order to find who you are, you need to look within. And the indication of to who you are is how you feel. And how you feel needs to be expressed outwardly in order for you to be an authentic human being. Now, does that sound okay? I mean, there's some of there's part of it that sounds, that sounds, because we want to be authentic, don't we? But what does it mean to be authentic? Our society treats authenticity as if it is a virtue in and of itself. But you can be authentically evil. This thing about being authentic and expressing what's inside is what has led our society to believe that men can be women and women can be men. Because if that's how you feel on the inside, and in order to be authentic, it needs to be expressed, then who are you to tell me that I shouldn't? You become an oppressor because you are preventing me from being myself. This is why the church today is becoming more and more hated in society, because the church has standards. The church says, no, this is not appropriate. This is not appropriate. But in this society, if you tell somebody you can't, you're an oppressor. This is where we are. If it feels good, do it. And it's impacting the church in that the church is becoming more, and in order to fit in with the society, the general church, I'm not talking about the Adventist church, but there are some aspects of it I see. The church is becoming more and more accepting of ideas and practices that are acceptable in society. Okay, so we need to press. Spiritual maturity requires that we intentionally develop every aspect of our humanity. You can develop your intellect to the hilt. You can know the Bible from cover to cover. You can quote Genesis through to the Revelation. But if you don't develop your emotional intelligence, you're a dangerous individual. We need balance. And we need to be intentional. We have, in terms of our health, we have CHIP program, we have New Start, and we have some great stuff in terms of physical health. We have, in terms of our spirituality, we have the preaching service, we have prayer meeting, we have other services. In terms of our intellect, we have our schools. Ellen White actually says that one of the best ways to develop the mind is through the study of God's word. But what do we intentionally have to develop ourselves emotionally? What do we have? What programs do we have in place? Not a lot. And yet, our emotional intelligence is one of the most essential facets of our ability to relate as human beings. It impacts our ability to relate to the society in which we live. It impacts our evangelism. It impacts our marriages. That there is nothing in terms of relationships that's not impacted by emotional intelligence. All right, so emotional intelligence. This is Time magazine from 1992. And the subheading there, emotional intelligence may be the best predictor of success in life, redefining what it means to be smart. Daniel Goleman, who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, primarily for the business world back in 1992, but the idea just expanded into so many other areas of life. And the idea behind emotional intelligence is that your IQ, your intellect may get you hired, but your EQ, your emotion quotient, will get you promoted. If you are working in any field that involves people, it is your emotional intelligence that is key to whether or not you're going to succeed. You cannot be a successful pastor just because you have qualifications. You have to be able to relate to people. You cannot be a good teacher if all you have is a set of facts and figures in your head. You have to be able to relate to students. I always wonder, why do people go into professions that involve people when they don't like people? Why would you do that? Money, yeah. So here are the domains of emotional intelligence which emphasize why it is so important. Emotional self-awareness, empathy. We said empathy is the ability to step into somebody else's world. Assertiveness. One of the biggest problems in healthy relationships is the lack of assertiveness, the lack of the ability to be able to state what we want while at the same time respecting people. Independence, problem solving, self-respect, flexibility, stress tolerance, impulse control. All of these things govern emotional intelligence, which is why they are so important in terms of our spiritual health. So emotional intelligence means you can recognize and identify your emotions. Is that telling me to stop? You're just... Okay, that's so long as it's not the signal to stop. That's fine. You crack on. So you can recognize and identify your emotions. I asked a question earlier, or met the statement earlier. Do women experience emotions more than men do? What was your original answer? So do women experience emotions more than men do? They tend to express emotions more than men do. And that's, a lot of that has to do with socialization. My father told myself and my brothers when we were children, came in a room and he warned us. He said to us, never tell anybody how you feel because they will only use it against you. Worst advice he could ever give. We took that on board, and it has played havoc in our lives. Myself and my two brothers in our marriages, and we had to work out a lot of stuff because we, as men, did not know how to handle our emotions. So we both experience emotions, we just express them differently. You can manage your feelings. I can know that I am a rageaholic, but the knowledge that I have a problem with anger is no good to me unless I can manage my anger. So that's the two aspects. Then you are sensitive to other people's emotions. Do you know people who are not? Dying. Yeah, for real. Seriously, not an emotionally intelligent individual. But there are people who, I say what I want, when I want, just telling the truth. But the Bible says, speaking the truth, how? In love. Yes, absolutely. And that's a whole different presentation. Because I have people within my family who are on the spectrum and were not aware that they were on the spectrum until later in life. And it's very easy to misinterpret how people behave and why they behave the way they do simply by observation. You're absolutely right. Some people who are on the spectrum do have an issue with expressing and reading other people's emotions. So yeah, that can be a challenge. You can manage your relationships effectively. So if I am sensitive to your feelings, if I know that if I say things in a certain way, it's going to impact you in an adverse way, then I can adapt the way that I say what I say. My son, when he was a little thing, always sensitive to raised voices. So I know that if I'm going to communicate with him, I need to keep my tone on an even keel. So that's essentially what emotional intelligence is all about. Self-awareness, self-regulation, our ability to be able to marshal and control our own emotions. So that's about us. But then empathy in terms of how we relate to other people, developing the social skills to communicate in a way that enhances relationships as opposed to adversely impacts. So here's the good news. Emotional intelligence is learned rather than inherited and can be improved throughout life. Your IQ is limited. I, for example, will never be at the level of an Einstein when it comes to science. But my emotional intelligence will improve and will continue to improve so long as I am connected with Jesus. That's what sanctification is all about, Christian growth. So, here are the things that impact emotional intelligence. Genetic makeup. Can I do anything about my genetics? It is what it is. My childhood experiences. Can I do anything about my childhood experiences? I can't change them. What can I change about my childhood experiences? How I respond to them. You said, how you interpret them. So, I grew up in a home with a father who was violently abusive. And when I was a child, I believed that he acted that way because I was a bad child. Now I can look back and understand that the issue was not with me, the issue was with him. So I can't change what he did, but I can change my perspective about why he did it. Current level of emotional support. Can we do anything about that? If I was to ask you, how many people do you have in your life? And I'm not asking you to raise your hands, just think about it. How many people do you have in your life who you can bare your soul to and know that they're going to treat what you give them with respect and care? Not going to put your business in the street. How many people do you have? It's not going to be a lot. I mean, we live in a community where we need to be authentic. But in terms of that inner circle, not going to be a lot of people. If you can count them on the fingers of one hand, You are blessed. If you have one person in your life who fits that bill, you're blessed. Exercise and nutrition. Does that affect our emotions? Absolutely. Chronic illness, sleep. How many of you in this room get the requisite amount of sleep that you need on a regular basis so that you can function well? Oh, you need to come and do a program as to how you accomplish that, because I suspect that the rest of us struggle. But lack of sleep, serious business. They did an experiment with U.S. soldiers. They tested them on their level of emotional intelligence and then deprived them of sleep for 2 days. And what they found was, after 2 days without sleep, the soldiers who scored low on emotional intelligence before the sleep deprivation compromised what they believed was morally acceptable. Those who scored high on emotional intelligence maintained their level of moral integrity. So lack of sleep can impact our ability to make good moral choices. So here's the greatest influences on emotional intelligence: our beliefs, the way we talk about our problems, our self-talk. How many of you talk to yourself? Every hand in the room should have gone up, because we all talk to ourselves. Some of us do it audibly. All of us do it internally. We need to be aware of what we're saying to ourselves. There is a psychologist called William James. He was a father of psychology. And he said, what was the quote? He said, most unhappiness is caused because we listen to ourselves instead of talking to ourselves. What he meant by that is that we tend to go with what our emotions are telling us, as opposed to analyzing what the message the emotion is giving us, and then making good decisions as a result of that. So we all talk to ourselves. What are we saying? Sometimes we encounter a problem and it's like, oh, why does this always have to happen to me? I'm never going to be able to do this. Da, da, da. Words are powerful. So the words that we speak to ourselves are shaping what we believe, how we feel, how we relate. So we need to take those thoughts captive. And then if we realize that those thoughts are not healthy, we need to change those thoughts, submit them to reality. There was Charles Bradford was preaching a sermon on Joseph, and he gave an illustration. He said not Joseph, David, when David went into the field when Goliath was doing his thing, and the Israelites they took one look at Goliath and they said, look at the size of him, we will never be able to defeat him. David looks at him and says, look at the size of him, I can't miss. Same situation, different perspective. You know, the saying goes, 2 men looked out from prison bars, one saw mud, the other stars. So our lives will move in the direction of our strongest thoughts, positively or negatively. It is a law of the human mind that by beholding we become changed. Man will rise no higher than his conception of truth. So what are we focusing on? People with low EQ are managed by their emotions. Was Samson intelligent? What evidence do we have that Samson was intelligent? The riddles, absolutely. That was clever stuff. What else? What did he do in life? He was a judge. He was like a magistrate. People would bring their cases and he would decide what would be the right thing to do. He was intelligent. But what was his problem? His refusal to manage his emotions. Who that mentioned that? Is Donald Trump intelligent? He's got smarts, but his problem is, again, his level of emotional intelligence. It's not great. All right, we need to shift. How long have I got? Give me a figure. 10 minutes? Okay, all right. Let's move quickly. We're getting there. So, meta-emotion, the study of how we feel about emotions. This is important. So, big boys don't cry. What's the message? That if boys cry, it's wrong to cry. And what is the impact? What's the fallout of this kind of belief? Suppression. I can't remember what the figures are in terms of suicide, but suicide is the number one cause of death in young men. Just think of the number one cause of death in young men is suicide. And I believe that one of the reasons for that is that we have taught our young men to suppress their emotions. No outlet. There was a research that I've tried to find the original research, but I can't find it. But it was referenced by a man called John Gottman, and he referenced this research that was done of which culture is most emotionally expressive. And which culture do you think came at the top in terms of emotional expression? Wasn't Jamaicans, no. Who do you think? It wasn't African. Europe. Yeah. Where in Europe? Italians came top. Who do you think came bottom? Moving in the right direction. No. There's two different nations or areas. One, Scandinavians. Two, Japanese. Now, you don't have to be highly expressive to be emotionally intelligent. I've done a lot of funerals. And I've done funerals where folks have just stood beside the graveside and I've done funerals where people want to like throw themselves into the wow. Now, does that mean that the one who is experiencing less grief than the one who is expressive? No, it's just a different way of expression. One of the concerns that men often have when we talk about emotional intelligence is that they feel that emotional intelligence means they have to compromise their masculinity. But Jesus was fully masculine. Jesus wasn't, it's kind of, somebody described the fact that the modern church has created a sissified Jesus. That wasn't who Jesus was. Jesus didn't play. The way he dealt with the Pharisees, the way he dealt with opposition. He was a proper man. But yet he was also fully emotionally intelligent, comfortable enough in his masculinity to cry openly at the graveside of Lazarus. So just because we are male doesn't mean that we have to compromise our ability to express our emotions in an appropriate way. So 10 minutes. Let's wrap this up. Is there such a thing as a sinful emotion? Let's go back to our... You know what? I may unpack this a little later on. But here, very quick question. Where on this diagram are sins committed? On the level of? You sure? You sure? Remember, what was the question? At what level is sin committed? Okay, we have the will. So I'm walking down the street and I come across a jeweler shop, and I look in the window and I see a nice platinum watch. And I say, I wouldn't mind having that watch. Have I sinned? You sure? All right, I look into the store and I see a security guard, and he doesn't look very fit. And I'm thinking to myself, if I grab that watch and run, he ain't catching me. Have I sinned? You sure? I said, if. Is there a difference between sin and temptation? Is temptation sin? So what is the difference between sin and temptation in terms of this? At what point does temptation become sin? When you choose. Let me illustrate it with this. Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has committed adultery already with her in his heart. Level of the thoughts or the will? So in terms of this, where is the sin committed? At the level of the thoughts or at the level of the will? It takes place in the thoughts, but where is the will expressed here? To lust. Up until that point that you decide to exercise the will, it's just temptation. And it's important because a lot of people who struggle with temptation, who think they are bad people, but temptation is a sign not of our degradation, it's a sign of our humanity. We are not judged for how we are tempted, we are judged for the choices that we make. All right. Is there such a thing as a bad emotion? We're going to deal with this in the sermon, so let me leave that there. Jesus wept. When Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane, what did he say that indicated his feelings? When he entered the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death." He felt like he was dying. What did he say that indicated his thoughts? He prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. What indicated his thoughts? What did he say? What did he pray? Father, oh my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. What was he thinking? I don't want to do this. Is there any other way? What was his choice? What did he say that indicated his choice? Oh, does it run out of battery? Oh my, oh, there we go. Oh. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. This, in a nutshell, is emotional intelligence. Our emotions may tell us one thing, our thoughts may tell us another, but we make a decision based upon our values, and our standards. In every situation, there's a stimulus, there's a response, and in between, there is our freedom to choose. And it is our freedom to choose that determines whether we grow as an individual or we diminish as an individual. Proactive people make decisions based on principles and values rather than reacting based on emotions. I'll leave you with Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. You shall love the Lord your God. How? All your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Now, later on, I'm going to be quizzing you. So commit to memory, or revise in your memory what we've covered here. Now, those of you who would like a copy of this presentation, there is a PDF that I've passed on. So see whoever you need to see, but you can get a copy of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to interacting with you later.